What's up? You good? My name is Lucky, and I've been thinking. Now, admittedly, I'm a little late to this, but better late than never, right? A few months back, a gentleman allegedly lit a warehouse on fire in California while live streaming it and talking about how he was upset over his lack of earning a livable wage.
If you're not going to pay us enough to live or afford to live, at least pay us enough not to do this.
This may or may not have caused some upheaval within the working class in the United States. As preceding this, we've had about 165 more warehouses get lit on fire. Now, some of those were downright arson. Many of those are still under investigation, and it remains to be seen if they're disgruntled workers or people just trying to get insurance payouts. But it doesn't stop there. The OpenAI guy got his house firebombed. Politician who voted on a data center got his house shot up. People have been getting upset. Billionaires are nervous because they may or may not have forced AI on the entire populace of the country, causing the job market to go down the toilet and many people's jobs to get replaced by AI. Now, they're doing things like building bunkers, which, I mean, that's reassuring. Elon Musk has been paying for women to have his children so that he has an unlimited supply of human shields for when he goes out in public. Now, in situations like this, what do? Well, do we ask our politicians for help? When our supreme leader was asked, "Sir, what do you think about the economic situation of the American people?" he said something along the lines of, "I don't think about it at all. I don't ever think about the economic situation of the American people."
You know what I really love? I love the inflation.
Again, that's, I don't know. That's reassuring, I guess. So, some of the content creators I like to watch in response to that warehouse fire that happened several months ago that I'm just now talking about said something along the lines of, "We need to just elect the right people," or "We need to trust in the system," or "This is America. Everything will work itself out." I made that last one up, but you catch my drift. Recently, a ginger man said something about a revolution. Now, between the elect the right people or revolution, I'm not really sure which would be a solution for this issue. Now, when it comes to how we can normalize a livable wage in the United States, coming up with a solution like that, when I try to come up with solutions for problems, I like to think back on my own lived experience or look back at the past to see what people in similar situations did when they faced problems like this. So, what did workers of the past do when they needed something like labor reform or, you know, a livable wage or safer working conditions or an 8-hour work week? Did they ask industrialists and politicians for help? Did they just pull themselves up by the bootstraps, start their own companies, and just make everything better? Did everything just work itself out? Now, this is America, so I'm sure nothing too crazy happened, because nothing crazy ever happens in America, right? So, what did the workers of the past do to make conditions better for themselves? Kind of like today. Back in the day, 100 or so years ago, it was ugly for the American working class. Factories, mines, railroads, slaughterhouses, and steel mills all generated a ton of revenue for business owners and rich industrialists, while increasingly dangerous and exploitative working conditions tended to be the norm for the working class. Like today, back in the day, it was all about maximizing profits while limiting labor costs. So, safety equipment, shorter workdays, better wages, compensation for injuries, and labor protection, all things that would eat into profits, were also all things that industrialists wanted nothing to do with. Corporations argued that any kind of government intervention would threaten economic growth and business freedom. So, surprise, surprise, the government and the state often sided with corporations and industrialists, which meant any type of strikes were usually broken up violently by the police, and sometimes the state would even call in militias to combat dissenting workers. This was all done so that rich industrialists could remain fed despite what that meant for everybody else. For the working class, it started to become pretty obvious that the system was designed to protect wealth and industry and not the people whose labor created that wealth and industry. I think back then people might have been built a little bit different because they eventually had enough. They organized, and it wasn't just for better conditions and higher wages, but for survival itself. And in the modern day, we don't necessarily see that a whole lot, at least nowhere near as much as we should see it.
What's up? You soft as hell. What you trying to do, bro? We can.
Workers were demanding rights and reform that would seem like some pretty basic shit by today's standards. Things that today we kind of take for granted. Now, I'd argue that we don't really talk about this stuff or are taught about this stuff because they want us to believe that the government and industries kind of came about basic workers' rights and reform on their own. These things just kind of developed over time, and they didn't come about because of a violent uprising from the working class. But that's just my own personal opinion. It was rough back then, back in the day. Coal miners faced cave ins, methane explosions, black lung, and economic control through company towns. Rail workers were subjected to dangerous equipment, crushing injuries, and wage cuts. Steel workers endured 12-hour shifts around molten metal, toxic fumes, and deadly machinery. Meatpacking workers stood in blood-covered factory floors surrounded by disease and industrial hazards. Factory workers, many of them literal children, worked in crowded buildings with little to no concern for safety. And across multiple industries, workers demanding change faced blacklistings, firings, evictions, private security forces, police violence, and military intervention through bullets. All these conditions combined created a perfect storm for what would soon follow.
I call it beautiful, clean coal. I tell my people never use the word coal unless you put beautiful, clean before it.
Historically, coal miners faced some of the worst working conditions in the country. Every time they went into the mines, they risked things like cave-ins, methane explosions, flooding, and brutal injuries from dangerous and poorly maintained equipment. Even if they survived leaving the mines, years of breathing in coal dust often led to things like black lung disease and respiratory issues. To me, I think one of the most egregious things about being a miner in the 1900s was that a lot of miners lived in something called company towns. Now, if you aren't familiar what a company town is, I want you to take into consideration that Elon Musk, in his infinite wisdom,
Oh my God, bro. Oh, hell no.
is trying to revive the concept of company towns in America. Now, there's currently at least 2 being made by Musk himself, and everything I've read about it goes out of its way to try to describe this as utopian. Now, again, if you aren't familiar with the concept of a company town, when I describe it to you, I want you to ask yourself, is this utopian? In a company town, the company pretty much owned and operated every aspect of daily life. So they own the housing, they own the stores, they own the bars, they own the schools, they own the churches, and they own the police force. In the company town, workers were usually paid in company scrip, which was like Chuck E. Cheese tokens or mining company fund bucks that were only good in the company town itself. This forced workers to pay exorbitant prices at the company store, and it kept workers from trying to save money to go try to find work somewhere else. Now, some of you might say, oh, well, that sounds pretty utopian, Lucky. And I don't know why you would think that, but it's 2026 on the internet, and there's always that one guy, right?
And unlikely to bring anyone down there. So, they're coming up. Chud.
Now, your thoughts might change on how utopian a company town is after I tell you this, which I believe to be one of the worst parts of the company town. You see, in the company town, if you were injured to a point that you could no longer work, which was probably pretty easy to do in a coal mine in the 1900s, you and your family would then be violently evicted from your company home, on your company street, in your company town. Now, if your injury resulted in death, you were actually safe from a violent eviction because you're dead. Your wife and kids, however, not safe from the violent eviction from your company home on your company street in your company town. Now, what do you do in that situation? Well, you could try to organize, but if you were caught trying to organize a union, you'd immediately be terminated from your job in the mine. You'd be blacklisted from all the surrounding mines. You'd be evicted from your company house, and you'd probably face violence. Are we seeing a pattern here yet? So miners did try to organize, and in response, coal companies would hire private detective agencies like Baldwin Felts to intimidate organizers, violently break strikes, and of course, aid in violently evicting miners and their families from coal company property. In these company towns, miners felt trapped in a system that not only controlled their labor, but essentially controlled their entire lives. As union activity increased in the early 20th century, so too did the tensions between the miners and the coal companies, often escalating into open conflict. This was especially true in places like Colorado and West Virginia, where workers recognized that organized resistance was really the only adequate way to defend themselves from the absolute power wielded by these coal companies. This eventually escalated into outright warfare. One of the most infamous examples of this was the Colorado Coalfield War of 1913 and 1914. After miners employed by the Rockefeller-owned Colorado Fuel and Iron Company decided to strike over union recognition, better pay, enforcement of safety laws, and improved housing conditions, the company responded by firing thousands of workers, evicting them and their families, and forcing them into tent cities. For months, armed conflict broke out between strikers, company guards, and state authorities. State authorities being cops, the feds, National Guard, the state. The conflict reached its most tragic point on April 20th, 1914, in what is known as the Ludlow Massacre. This happened when the Colorado National Guard and company-aligned forces led an attack on a tent city full of strikers and their families. In the attack by the Colorado National Guard and company-aligned forces, the Colorado National Guard and company-aligned forces would set fire to the tent city, resulting in multiple deaths of strikers, women, and children. News of the massacre spread throughout the country and outraged labor activists nationwide. Understandably so. In West Virginia, miners were dealing with a similar struggle in that they were involved in pretty constant armed conflicts with the private detective agencies hired by the coal companies, company loyalists, and state authorities, i.e. the police. These conflicts would go on throughout the 1910s, resulting in multiple deaths, civil unrest, and just general chaos in the mining community and segments of the working class in parts of West Virginia. This would culminate in 1921 in what I believe to be the most well-known labor conflict in American history, or at least the most well-known one we're going to speak about today. That being the legendary Battle of Blair Mountain, which took place in Blair Mountain, West Virginia in the year of our Lord, 1921. Now, to be fully honest with you, I don't know if there is an actual town called Blair Mountain, West Virginia, but the battle happened at a mountain called Blair Mountain in West Virginia. I probably should have looked that up while I was writing this. It wasn't something I thought about while I was writing this. I just take my word for it. It happened at Blair Mountain. If there isn't a town called Blair Mountain in West Virginia, the mountain's called Blair Mountain. So I mean, it's just semantics. You're just drawing straws. You're just being critical when you don't need to be, and we all need to stop being so critical, okay? Okay? Thank you. It kicked off when about 10,000 armed miners marched on Logan County to confront anti-union coal operators and local officials who'd spent the last several years suppressing labor organization efforts. What would follow would be the largest armed labor uprising in American history. The miners were confronted by local cops, private detectives, and anti-union defenders, leading to a gun battle that would spread out across the mountains of southern West Virginia. Sidebar. Some people believe that the Battle of Blair Mountain is where the term redneck originates from. This is because during the battle, the miners tied red bandanas around their necks to help differentiate themselves and their comrades from the people they were battling against. Later on in the labor movement, some people adopted this and were referred to as rednecks around Appalachia. I like this idea. I find it hysterical. I find it ironic because the term redneck used to stand for a group of people that violently fought and died to try to secure the right to unionize and to try to obtain better labor rights. And now the term redneck is synonymous with a group of people that really don't like the idea of labor unions, and for reasons we won't talk about in this video, really don't seem to like the idea of better labor rights. Kind of funny how the world works sometimes. Eventually, federal forces intervened and put an end to the uprising. But Blair Mountain demonstrated the extent of corporate brutality in America and showed the violent lengths corporations would go to suppress labor rights. This, in turn, would piss off the majority of the working class, leading to some working class solidarity and helping to lay the groundwork for future labor reform. Now, the working class is the majority of the population in this country. And when they come together in anger and solidarity, there's a good chance that is going to help to achieve things for the benefit of the working class. If you're a politician, right, and it's your job to come up with laws for labor reform or better workers' rights or vote on those things, when you are put in a position where you need to decide on either something that is going to satiate millions of angry people or enriching yourself and potentially winning a date with the guillotine, you're probably going to go with the former. And you don't really have that much of a choice, especially when you know that several members, thousands of members of that same working class just had a violent gun battle across the mountains of southern West Virginia, and that they might not be too opposed to picking those guns back up. I would argue this is why we don't see things like the Ludlow Massacre or the Battle of Blair Mountain on American public school curriculum. They want to kind of promote this idea that these corporations that run our country and the government are kind of benevolent.
What do you mean by the word benevolent?
They see problems and they resolve them. You know, they come to labor reform on their own. They enact better workers' rights on their own. They don't necessarily want us to know the violent history of these corporations running our country or the corporations in the past that were excessively violent to suppress workers' rights. And they don't want us to really know what the working class of the past had to do to bring about things like labor reform, safer working conditions, or achieving and normalizing a livable wage. Railroad workers had it rough too. They did occupy a unique position in industrial America in that they were heavily relied upon to connect our factories, farms, mines, and cities. America may not have been industrialized had it not been for the railroad. However, the laborers themselves were viewed as kind of expendable. They didn't have any kind of safety regulations like we do today, and so railroad workers regularly had to deal with things like crushing injuries from coupling train cars or just outright getting smoked by derailments and boiler explosions. On top of that, they had to perform gruel manual labor for incredibly long 12 to 16-hour shifts without any breaks. Now, I've worked 12-hour shifts in a factory before, but I also spent a lot of that time hiding in the bathroom and taking naps or just getting paid to avoid labor. And I couldn't imagine what it'd be like working on the railroad, where if they maybe took too long to wipe the sweat off their brow or deal with the horrendous crushing injury they just sustained from coupling a train car, they may have been beaten or worse. During economic downturns, railroad companies frequently responded by cutting wages while maintaining dividends for investors and executives, creating widespread resentments among employees who were already risking their lives daily, only now getting paid less than they were worth, if they were even getting paid that at all. Spoiler alert, they weren't. Tensions erupted as they often do. In 1877, when the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad announced another round of wage reductions during a severe economic depression, the resulting strike spread rapidly and became the first nationwide strike and labor uprising in American history. Rail traffic was halted. Rail yards were occupied and violent clashes broke out between workers, cops, state militias, and eventually federal troops because the government only restrains itself from violently lashing out at you when you're useful to them. In several cities, armed confrontations resulted in dozens of deaths and extensive property damage. The strike demonstrated both the growing power of organized labor and the willingness of government authorities to intervene on behalf of major corporations when industrial production was threatened. And by intervene, I of course mean violent reprisals. This happened again with the Pullman strike of 1894. The Pullman Company manufactured luxury railroad cars in Chicago, which is, in fact, the greatest city in America, if not the world.
And it's not just me saying it, other people are saying it.
They also operated a company town where they controlled wages, they controlled the rent, and they jacked up prices in the stores. We just talked about company towns and how they are totally greasy, unwashed cheeks, and they are essentially one of the final bosses of labor exploitation. Following an economic downturn, the company reduced wages significantly, but refused to lower rents or other costs imposed on workers living in Pullman. Pullman is still actually a neighborhood in Chicago, again, the greatest city in America, out south, which is the south side to all you plebs who don't live in Chicago. I think Pullman's where Risky Road's at. shout out Risky Road. If you know, you know. Many employees found themselves unable to support their families despite continuing to work full time. Frustrated by management's refusal to negotiate, workers launched a strike that soon gained support from the American Railway Union under the leadership of Eugene V. Debs. The conflict quickly expanded into a nationwide boycott that disrupted railroad traffic throughout much of America. Railroad executives appealed to the federal government for assistance, arguing that the strike interfered with interstate commerce and mail delivery. Federal courts, of course, sided with the companies and issued injunctions against labor leaders. President Grover Cleveland, who is probably most famous for having children out of wedlock, no shade, eventually deployed federal troops to break the strike. Violent confrontations followed, resulting in deaths, injuries, and widespread destruction. For workers, the Pullman strike taught them a hard lesson. When labor disputes threatened powerful economic interests, corporations could often rely on courts, police, and the federal government to violently intervene to protect wealthy industrialist business operations, while workers were left with their ass out in the breeze, stuck fighting for their interests largely on their own because, big shock here, the government industries don't give a shit about the plight of the working class. I guess some things never change.
Well, I guess the look I'm best known for is blue steel.
By the late 19th century, the steel industry had become one of the most profitable industries in the world. generating huge fortunes for industrialists while subjecting workers to grueling and often deadly physical labor. Are we starting to see a common thread yet here in this video? At Carnegie Steel's Homestead Works outside of Pittsburgh, workers spent 12-hour shifts around blast furnaces, molten steel, toxic fumes, and massive machinery capable of causing horrific injuries and death in an instant. Amputations, burns, crushing injuries, and fatal accidents were common, and many workers believed that union representation was the only protection they had against increasingly dangerous conditions and declining wages. In 1892, Carnegie Steel chairman Henry Clay Frick, frickin' asshole, sought to weaken the powerful Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers, that's a name choice, by imposing wage cuts and refusing to negotiate a new contract. When workers resisted, Frick locked them out of the mill, surrounded the facility with fences topped with barbed wire, and hired approximately 300 armed Pinkerton detectives to retake the plant. On July 6, the Pinkertons attempted to enter the mill by river barge, only to be met by thousands of armed workers and local residents. As the Pinkerton Detective Agency rolled up on their low barge, they were preceded by a day-long gun battle across the riverbanks, resulting in multiple injuries and dozens of deaths on both sides, ending when the Pinkertons surrendered, because the Pinkertons was some hoes. Although it initially appeared as though the workers had been victorious, the Pennsylvania National Guard, it's always the National Guard, soon occupied the town and regained control of the mine to give back to management. The Homestead strike became one of the clearest examples of corporations using private security forces and government intervention to suppress organized labor, reinforcing the belief among workers that employers would rather resort to violence than recognize their demands. And of course, as we keep seeing in this video time and time again, it reinforced the idea, the fact, that the government had no qualms about using violence in order to get the working class to bend to their will.
Okay, we're going to kill them. You know, they're going to be like dead.
Now, that shouldn't come as some shocking revelation this deep in this video, nor should the rest of the instances of this exact same thing or similar things happening in the rest of the video. Now, it doesn't mean you should stop watching the video. You should definitely keep watching the video. Please keep watching this video.
Tell him what sounds a cow makes. It's moo, motherfucker. It's moo.
At the dawn of the 20th century, the Stockyards in Chicago, the greatest city in the world,
And it's not just me saying it, other people are saying it.
stood at the heart of America's meatpacking industry. They processed millions of animals a year through an industrialized system that maximized efficiency regardless of human cost. Workers labored in dangerous conditions surrounded by blood, animal waste, chemicals, disease, and fast-moving machinery. Floors were slick with grease and waste, increasing the risk of serious accidents, while laborers wielded razor-sharp knives for long hours at an exhausting pace. What could possibly go wrong?
Now stand aside, worthy adversary. 'Tis but a scratch. A scratch? Your arm's off. No, it isn't. Well, what's that then? I've heard worse.
Many employees were recent immigrants with few employment options, making them especially vulnerable to exploitation. Low wages, workplace injuries, and unsanitary conditions were accepted as normal by the industry, while attempts to organize unions were met with resistance from employers who often used strikebreakers and anti-union tactics to maintain control. The public's attention was drawn to the unsettling, unsightly, deplorable, hazardous, downright disgusting conditions of Chicago's meatpacking industry in 1906 when Upton Sinclair published his book or released his book, The Jungle. Admittedly, I already knew about this because a young Lucky was taught this in public school. Now, I'm not sure if I was only taught this because I'm from the area. I'm not from back of the yards. Shout out back of the yards.
Same fat boy, bitch. Don't get me so you can Wood Street, bitch. 4-5 when we stay alive, bitch. Motherfuckers always AK, nigga. Boy, nigga, that shit right, nigga. Say no, motherfucker. Say no.
But the Chicagoland area. So I'd be curious to see if I only learned about this because it was local history or if this was something that they taught throughout public schools across America. If you yourself are a survivor of the deplorable American public school system, let me know down in those comments, did they teach you about Upton Sinclair in the jungle? Although Sinclair intended to expose the exploitation of workers under industrial capitalism, which was kind of the point of the book, readers were horrified by his descriptions of contaminated meat, unsafe food processing practices, and the general filth of the stockyards more so than the treatment of the workers. The book revealed an industry in which both workers and the consumers themselves were placed at risk in pursuit of profit, making the stockyards a powerful symbol of the darker side of American industrialization and helping fuel demands for greater oversight and reform. However, I think a lot of the focus was putting a focus on better regulation of our meat packing processes and how we handle food, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because it sounds a lot like the stockyards at the time kind of had a Indian fish market vibe, if you know what I mean.
Flies on deck. There's no shortage of flies. Oh my god. Always someone around.
No shade to India. Now, it was messed up for the workers, but to be fair, because I've been kind of, it's been all about the workers in this video, understandably so. But to be fair, I understand why the major takeaway from this was how disgusting the stockyards were and how things needed to change for the well-being of the general public and how that took precedent over the well-being of the workers. So this is me being fair, right? You see that, right? This isn't you're some weird commie. All you care about is the workers. You don't care about how that's going to impact the business. You see it. You see it. You see it. Me being fair. Still should have gave those workers better rights, though.
Hundo P.
And the mayor of Chicago shows up like, I'm here. I'm not upset about this. They're speaking their minds. It's cool. But they're anarchists. They're not just doing what they're doing.
So at the heart of this video, we're talking about working class solidarity. We're trying to examine what workers of the past did to improve their own conditions and see if we can find a solution for the issues we're facing as the working class today. Now, once again, working class solidarity. You, me, we're the workers. Unless you're a wealthy industrialist watching this. If so, please give me a job and please send me some money. Your boy's hurting here. Help me out, for the love of God. I digress. This next part might seem pretty extreme. This next part, you might think, oh, you lost me. You lost me. I sat through all that, and you lost me with that last part. Some of y'all might be like, well, with demands that extreme, no wonder the state turned to violence.
Okay, we're gonna kill them. You know, they're gonna be like dead.
I just want y'all to keep an open mind for this, okay? Because some of y'all are gonna be like, what the hell? That's pretty hefty demand. Bear with me here. So, by the late 1880s, industrial workers in America were all coming together to get one important demand met, one extreme demand met, something nobody had ever asked for, nobody had ever conceptualized such a crazy idea before, but they wanted it. They needed this. This was their demand. Industrial workers of America were demanding an 8-hour work day.
Oh my God, bro. Oh, hell no, man. What the fuck, man?
At a time when many laborers worked 10, 12, 14, or even 16 hours a day under dangerous conditions, the demand for shorter hours became a rallying cry for workers across the country. Chicago emerged as the center for this movement due to its large industrial workforce and growing network of labor organizations, on top of being the most goated city in the world.
And it's not just me saying it.
Employers, however, viewed these demands as a threat to productivity and profits. While newspapers and political leaders frequently portrayed labor activists as dangerous radicals. Tensions escalated dramatically on May 3rd, 1886, when police opened fire on striking workers outside the McCormick Reaper Works factory after a confrontation involving strikebreakers crossing picket lines. Several workers were killed or wounded, and news of the shooting spread rapidly throughout Chicago's labor movement. In response, labor leaders organized a protest meeting at Haymarket Square following the evening to condemn police violence and support the broader struggle for the 8-hour workday. Now, you would think this would be a good time to try to tone things down for the bosses, the company owners, the strike breakers, and hey, even the police to come together and say, hey, we should maybe try to find a solution to this to avoid further violence. Well, you'd be wrong.
You're wrong! You're wrong! You're wrong!
The gathering at Haymarket Square began peacefully, with speakers addressing a crowd that gradually thinned as rain moved into the area. Even Chicago's mayor attended part of the event and later reported that it appeared orderly and nonviolent. However, as the police moved in,
You're wrong! You're wrong! You're wrong!
to disperse the remaining demonstrators, someone threw a bomb into the crowd of approaching cops. The explosion killed one cop and fatally wounded several others, triggering panic and chaos. Police immediately opened fire into the crowd, while demonstrators and bystanders fled for their lives. Sidebar. Hey there, sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to make a note of something real quick. It's been 120 something years since the Haymarket affair, and the Chicago police, the CPD, don't conduct themselves a whole lot differently now than they did back then. A little something about me. I'm no stranger to catching a beating. I've caught quite a few in my day. A lot of these were at the hands of police. Different police from different police departments, but I've never caught more beatings from any department than I have from the CPD, the Chicago Police Department. I believe that they are well known, maybe nationally, internationally, at least within the city, for doing terrible shit to people. I'll give you an example. One Christmas day, I spent in a dumpster behind the JJ's Fish on Central Avenue. It was about 10 degrees outside, and I was trying to get my hands, which were zip tied behind my back, to the front of my body. This was after catching a rousing beating from two plainclothes cops who then threw me in said dumpster. Now, you might think that sounds outlandish, but all you would need to do is speak to anyone who has spent any amount of time around the streets of Chicago, and they will tell you, they will confirm with you that the CPD are known for doing very scandalous shit to people. Scandalous things like throwing me in a dumpster on Christmas Day because they're salty about having to work on Christmas. Now, I've heard and slightly witnessed things getting a little better since the introduction of body cameras. However, in my personal opinion, I believe that throughout the history of Chicago, there isn't currently, and there probably will never be a more violent gang than the CPD. I'll say that one more time. I don't believe there has ever been or will ever be a more violent gang in the city of Chicago than the Chicago Police Department. That's just my own personal belief. I'm just saying. The exact number of civilians killed remains uncertain, but the violence shocked the nation and sparked a massive crackdown on organized labor. Authorities arrested labor activists, anarchists, and union leaders throughout Chicago, eventually putting 8 men on trial despite weak evidence connecting several of them to the bombing itself. 4 were executed, 1 took his own life in prison, and the remaining defendants received lengthy prison sentences. The Haymarket affair became one of the most influential events in labor history, transforming public perceptions of organized labor and deepening the divide between workers and the institutions of government and industry. To many business leaders and politicians, Haymarket became proof that labor activism was inherently dangerous and radical. Go fucking figure. To workers, it became a symbol of how quickly demands for basic rights could be met with police violence, mass arrests, and political repression. The event helped radicalize portions of the labor movement, influenced labor struggles around the world, and became a lasting symbol of the sacrifices workers made in their fight for dignity, representation, and a voice in the industrial economy. Today, a memorial stands in Haymarket Square, which is how I learned about this initially. After teenage Lucky was kicked out of his first court-ordered rehab, called Haymarket, I made my way through Haymarket Square on my way to go out west to the west side and get on some drug-fueled shenanigans, about 18 at the time. After said drug-fueled shenanigans, I went home and researched the whole Haymarket affair, and it totally changed my view of being working class and being a member of the workforce. Now, admittedly, I probably do suffer from some kind of chemical imbalance. I may not be the most well put together person, but it definitely had a major impact on my decision to become a career criminal. It didn't really sit right with me, this idea of being subservient to a bunch of people who didn't really care about my physical well-being and would much rather just subject me to police violence than give me better working conditions, better pay, etc. Now, I have since made attempts to turn my life around, made some pretty decent strides in that. But even now, as someone struggling to be a productive member of society, you know, instances like what we've talked about here from the past and even the current state of affairs for the working class in America still don't really sit right with me. Now, not all of this immediately changed the reality of the workers who fought for better rights and conditions, but they helped to lay the groundwork for what we consider to be standard for workers today. Weekends, overtime pay, workplace safety rules, workers' comp, union rights, child labor laws, mine inspections, food safety standards, and even Labor Day are normal features of modern life. But most of these protections were not voluntarily provided by employers or governments. They emerged after decades of strikes, protests, organized campaigns, court battles, massacres, and literal armed conflicts. These labor wars helped establish the principle that workers were entitled to more than a paycheck. They were entitled to safety, dignity, representation, and a voice in the conditions they worked in. These conflicts helped to wrench us out of the Gilded Age and force the people in power to pressure the filthy rich industrialists and the ruling class to take better care of the workforce so they could live a meaningful life that wasn't simply a couple steps up from indentured servitude. Years went on with people taking for granted what generations before them fought and even died to try to achieve. Now we find ourselves in a new Gilded Age, defined by wealth hoarding off the backs of a working class that has essentially been shot in the knee and told to continue to run the rat race. Things are obviously bad. They're only going to continue to get worse. And I'm sure you're wondering what solution I can propose to make things better. What can we as the working class do to improve conditions for ourselves, normalize a livable wage, get better workers' rights, or have our government and the people in power, the industrialists, our bosses, the tech oligarchs, etc., to give us a better life? You made the video, so obviously you're going to tell us the solution. So, what is the solution? So, I could tell you that you need to just stay the course. This is America. Everything will work itself out if we just elect the right people and do something with our bootstraps. Whatever that saying is. I could go to the opposite end of the spectrum and say we need to have our own France in the late 1700s moment. You can download schematics for a guillotine online and slap one together in your backyard relatively easily. The truth is, I can't tell you what I think is the solution based on the information we went over in this video.
Oh my God, bro. Oh, hell no, man. What the fuck, man? Get your ass.
There's something called NSPM 7. Maybe you heard of it. Put up NSPM 7. This is very real. It's very concerning. And based on this kind of vague list of things, if you say something that somebody might not like, who would that be? You could potentially be labeled as a domestic terror suspect. We'll go with that because I don't think I can say the actual word on here. Your boy's trying to get monetized at some point. Now, full transparency, I may or may not be sought after already by a few different law enforcement entities, and I would very much like to not add the FBI or the DHS to that list. I have gone this long in my life, come this far without being labeled a domestic terror suspect, and I'd like to hopefully go the rest of my life without gaining that label. So I can't really tell you what I think the best way forward is. I can't give you a well-articulated, well-mapped out plan, but I can tell you this. I think whatever we choose to do to make our lives better, to make our country and world better for future generations, to bring about labor reform, to bring about normalizing a livable wage. Every solution available to us starts with two things: class consciousness and working class solidarity. You know, I'm a member of the American working class. I have been my whole life. I'm not sure exactly how it is in other countries, but I'm going from a perspective of an American in the American working. Right now, we are in a class war. Many people believe we're actually in a culture war, but the reality is we're in a class war and we are losing, and we've been losing. But right now, the thing that's really getting us, the thing that's really cementing this loss is the culture war. Now, I hate to break this to some of you, but the culture war is kind of bullshit. It's not legit. It's not a thing. It's being used to distract you from the class war that we are losing. I think the Romans came up with the system of divide and conquer. That was a very long time ago, and it's still used today because it's incredibly effective. We are maybe the most divided I've ever seen the working class in my life, and I'm an old ass man. So the culture war is very effective. If we want to make our lives better, we need to recognize that these people who are telling us to set our sights on other members of the working class.
They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
And they're spending millions, if not billions of dollars to push that message. Those people are actually the problem. Those are the people that are actually making our lives more and more unlivable. Those are the people you should probably not trust to tell you who your enemies are. Working class solidarity is integral for any kind of solution you want to put together. You want a grassroots political movement that's going to wrench back control of our government through elections and all that jazz? You need working class solidarity first. You want to have some kind of, attempt at forcefully commandeering the means of production like we went over in this video. That's going to require some working class solidarity. You want to maybe put the fear of God into some CEOs or something. I mean, you could probably do that by yourself, but I'm not telling you to do that. Just real quick. I am definitely not telling you to do that. I did not tell you to do that just now. I'm telling you, whoever's watching this video, I am not saying to go out and do that. We need to come together as the working class. We are more powerful together than we are divided. They want us divided. That's their plan. That's been their plan, and they're good at it. That's where the solidarity comes in, because I can't do this by myself. You probably can't do it by yourself. No shade. We need to come together. And so that's my solution. I know it may not be what you're looking for, but that's what I got for you.
We tried, right?
I tried.
We did our best. That's all that matters.
I did my best. We tried.
Maybe next year we'll come back and try it again?
Maybe next year. I'll come back and I'll try it next year.
This channel's new. I just started this, and the main point I am making this YouTube channel is to promote class consciousness, to potentially slap together a community that can thrive on working class solidarity and promote class consciousness. I'm trying to do what I can to bring people together. And really, this is the best I can do with the things that I have at my disposal. I would like to try to create a community built on these concepts, class consciousness and working class solidarity. And I believe my best option for doing so is this: making this channel, starting out, putting out this video. And I would very much like for you to join that community and help it grow. So, if you would like to do that, I would very much like for you to do that.
Join us! Join us!
Please do all the YouTube things. Like, comment, subscribe. If you're on mobile, hype this bad boy, and look out for the next one. I'll try to upload with some kind of regularity, get on some kind of schedule, and I really hope I see you there. Until then, my name is Lucky. Stay dangerous.